Thank you so much. All right, I'll go ahead and call up the screen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Here we are. If I remember, this is recorded now as something like the 130th session we've had or so. I might be off slightly, but it's somewhere in that. So, okay, so as always, Ben and Christinet, I greet Christ in you and welcome you back this morning. Here's our opening prayer. Let's just take a moment of quiet and bring ourselves into this space. We're going to be exploring Eckart's interpretation of the parable, or rather the story of Mary and Martha. So help me, O God, to embrace the holy dryness of prayer, seeking neither consolation nor delight, but only that I may serve you as a dear guest in the home of my heart. Amen. So the readings are a little long this morning in order to hold the thought together. I didn't really know for sure how to break them up and didn't want it to span too long a time. So if you'll bear with me, the first reading begins on page 155. Depending on which version of my book you have, which printing, some of you may have here a different sermon number, 89 or 86 instead of sermon 9. My gratitude to Joanne for catching that as I sent her this morning. And she was the one who originally saw that after it was published, that I had made an error. So I made that correction, and some of your books may indeed now have that, but others may be. That's why there's a discrepancy there. So we had been looking in our last time together about various interpretations of this passage from Luke. And that's what I'm referring to here with the first phrase here. So these are just a sampling of interpretations of Luke 10:38 to 42 over the course of Christian centuries. But Meister Eckart's interpretation of Sermon 9 is perhaps most unexpected in its elevation of Martha's role over that of Mary. Underlying his reading of the story is the idea that the written word is vulnerable to misinterpretation because it does not always convey the correct inflection of the spoken word. Thus, in verse 40, when Martha asks, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself?" Eckert suggests that she is not being spiteful, as other interpretations have implied. Rather, says Eckert, she said it because of endearment. That is what motivated her. We might call it affection or playful chiding. Later, when Martha further insists, "Lord, tell her to help me," Eckert observes, this last remark was said with tender regard, but this could not be gathered from the words themselves. So arguing in this way, he highlights two central features of his spirituality. The first is his concern that meditation can too easily become an end in itself, rather than a means to an end. The second is his understanding of detachment as the highest virtue of the spiritual life. I will address each in turn. First, Eckert opens his sermon by describing three motivations that led Mary to sit at Jesus' feet: the goodness of her soul, a deep longing for something she could not yet identify, and the consolation and delight that flowed from listening to the words of Christ. Fearing that Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus more for enjoyment than spiritual profit, Martha's tender regard was rooted in her concern that Mary would remain stuck in the pleasant feeling of sitting at Christ's feet and progress no further. In other words, Eckert was cautioning that a person can become so attached to the delightful feelings of spiritual consolation in prayer that they meditate because it feels good rather than for God alone. Thus, when spiritual practice can itself become an obstacle to knowing God. In another of his sermons, he makes this point forcefully and colorfully. And I quote, Indeed, if a person thinks they will get more of God by meditation, by devotion, by ecstasies, or by special infusion of grace, than by the fireside or the stable, that is nothing but taking God, wrapping a cloak around his head, and shoving him under a bench. For whoever seeks God in a special way gets the way and misses God who lies hidden in it. But whoever seeks God without any special way gets him as he is in himself, and that person lives with the Son, and he is life itself. All right, so lots to reflect on there. So our second reading follows from 156 through 157. The special way Eckert refers to here is any approach to prayer that confuses spiritual feelings, experiences, or particular methods with attaining God. As we have seen, for the Christian contemplative, there is nothing to attain. Through the incarnation, God has already rendered a divine human union that need only be realized in any given moment. So it seems if a lack of monastic structure and communal accountability presents some of the greatest obstacles for living as contemplatives in the world, by contrast, the rigidity of structure and overt monastic trappings may present the greatest obstacles for professed religious who would more easily be tempted to over-identify with them. The Cistercian way, the Benedictine way, the Ignatian way, the Carmelite way can be as much a help as a hindrance to one's spiritual progress. If we become attached to any spiritual way, method, or discipline that stifles the movement and freedom of the Spirit within us, Eckert cautions we will be left only with the method, that is the way, but miss God who lies hidden in it. In contrast to Mary, who is perilously close to this kind of attachment, Eckert holds out Martha, whose service is also motivated by three things: her advanced age and life experience, a maturity that enabled her to serve with perfect love, and finally, the dignity of her guest, who was Christ. With these in mind, Eckert concludes that Martha had matured beyond the need for spiritual consolations. She was not attached to any spiritual way, but remained fluid and flexible in her ability to carry out her service in complete serenity, as love demanded in any given situation. Martha's perfect embodiment of action and contemplation is signified by the fact that Jesus names her twice when he addresses her concern in verse 41. The first Martha refers to her perfection in temporal works. The second Martha indicates that she lacked nothing of all that is necessary for eternal happiness. Martha, in other words, has grown beyond seeking God in a special way, and thus gets him as he is in himself. To live nimbly, moment to moment, as the Spirit calls and love demands, is to live in perfect union with God. Here again is contemplative discipleship. So as our closing prayer before conversation today. O Lord, look upon us with tender regard as we devise our manifold ways of avoiding your summons to love. Make our time of service to you spring from our time of silence with you. and do not let our attachments to any particular way blind us from following you, who are the only way. Amen. All right. It's a lot there. So as I mentioned, as we were getting started, I wanted to kind of, in one session, give more or less his whole interpretation of both figures, because otherwise it's easy to lose that thread over the course of a week or so. So I apologize for the length there of those readings. But as always, I'm happy to sit with you a bit in silence, but I open the floor to anyone who would like to comment. Hi, John. Good morning.
Good morning. I became really serious about meditation when I became a therapist. And I began meditating, and it's what in the therapy we call self-care, because we're exposed to all this really, really difficult material. And meditation and yoga and things like that are ways that people take care of themselves. And then when I retired, I thought, oh, this is great. I'll have time to meditate a lot more. But it didn't work out that way. I found that I was meditating less and less, and I was keeping much less to the discipline. And I finally figured out, well, I wasn't meditating as much because I didn't need it as much. I didn't need it the same way that I'd needed it before. And my spiritual director at one point pointed out to me that my real spiritual vocation is service. And he says, that's what you're really doing. And the meditation is a part of it. Anyway, so then we moved up here and I went back to work, and surprise, surprise, I started meditating again. I had to meditate. So it's a part of what I do. And I love it. I love the meditation. I spend time in retreats and so forth, but it's a means to an end.
John, thank you for that. If I can ask you, just by way of probing a little bit, and it's more really curiosity. So when you reached that point where you said, I didn't need it as much, and you kind of came to that realization, as much for what?
It was protection, is all I can say. Balance, I guess, would be another way to put it. In our business, we are exposed to difficult stuff. I mean, working with a family where there's sexual abuse of a child and going on in the family is hard. And meditating and opening your heart up to God is a part of keeping yourself from getting pulled into the craziness of that you'd otherwise be exposed to. And so when I wasn't being exposed to that stuff in the same way, then I didn't feel the same call to meditate that I had before. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but that's the way I felt it.
Yeah, John, it actually was. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. It's almost like, to just summarize, you're able to more hold that balance or that place, or hold what it is you're taking in a more balanced, level way, without the need for as much of the segregated meditation time. So you were kind of hold that. I mean, that's a very Martha thing, according to Eckhart. You know what I mean? That's essentially what she's doing. That's why I was asking. It's very helpful to hear how you experience the fruits of the meditation, and then to some degree the ability to kind of hold that space with less time committed to the silence at times in your life. That I see.
Right. And it allows you to do, for me, it allows me to do the real thing, which is to go back out in the world.
Right.
And, you know, and in my profession, in therapy, everybody who sticks with it for any length of time at all has a pretty well worked out system of self-care. People are meditating, people are doing yoga, people are very serious runners. There has to be something that allows you to maintain that kind of balance.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate that, John. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think, one of the things that John is raising, that comment makes for me is the question of that I talk about in the paragraphs around structure. I think for those of us in the world, it's the lack of structure that becomes a challenge. But I do think it's precisely the structure that can and does become a challenge within monasteries. Just this past year, I was visiting a monastery, and one of the monks said, we come 7 times a day to prayer, but many of us have long stopped praying. And it's precisely the structure that just becomes rote and mundane, and sort of, so any particular the beauty of that for us in the world is that there's, while we may entertain the romantic fantasy that running off to a convent or monastery would solve all my contemplative problems, it really doesn't. You bring yourself with you, right? And all of those things come with you. So and on top of that there are gifts within the context of those of us who are serving, and where that is a major or significant or predominant part of our vocation as in service, where there are things that I think we actually can access that monastics don't or can't because of the structure. So it's one of the things I'm trying to address, and why I incorporate, Eckart's very playful exegesis of this text, is because he really is trying to examine the preconceived notions we might have about who Mary or who the contemplative or who the monastic is, versus poor us who are serving in the world and are sort of second or third class citizens to those elevated right monastics. And he's trying to level that playing field to some degree on both sides. And I think it's a fun and playful interpretation, because he's sparring, of course, with members of other religious orders within the church about the meaning of contemplation and its role in the life of Christian discipleship. But he does so in a way that, for our benefit, opens up ways to move past some of those romantic projections we might assume, because of what my friend Jonathan Montaldo calls the patina, right? That the trappings of the monastery, which can feel very romantic and medieval and sort of seductive on a spiritual level, but then you realize, after a while, it just becomes another distraction, right? So there's a lot of fruit there, I think, to reflect on. Thanks, John. Hi, Penny, go right ahead.
Thank you, John, for that reflection, because I've experienced in the last couple of years this tension in myself between the Mary of me and the Martha of me. And after my husband died, I found St. Columba's and the Peace Chapel, and was prompted by a friend also who meditated regularly every morning. I found myself doing that and was very, very faithful to it. And I've noticed that as the pandemic has lifted and I have become more active in the world, that I have become more active in the world, and this service side of me has sort of taken over. And so I struggle personally with like, why am I not doing that anymore? And I do Tai Chi in the morning, which is a form of meditative practice as well. But the regular sits on a daily basis, I'm not doing that. And so I feel when I look back at that, I think I sort of slightly guilty that I've given that up. Or what have I replaced it with? Getting up early, as I still do. I've got a very big to-do list, and I'm trying to find time to write. And it's this Eckhart reading, I think, is helpful because for me, it suggests that instead of bifurcating myself as a Martha or a Mary, I need to find a way to accept that there are different energies at different times in my life. And obviously, after my husband died, I really needed to get in touch with myself in a way that I hadn't been present to myself during his long illness. And it was helpful to be still. And I still find these Peace Chapel a time to be still but whether it's one or the other, I think I get caught in an idea that it is one or the other, and it should be both. But right now, I still have a lot of energy, and should feel that the service I'm doing is part of that expression of God in the world. So I found this a very helpful reading. I was glad to see the Eckhart reflection. It's charming.
Yeah, thanks, Penny. And I think that's true. And for many of us, it's a very delicate balance because, as I tried to incorporate in the prayer today, on the one hand, it is very easy to say, oh, Meister Eckhart said that, this meditation or the silence is just a way, and I'm really seeking something beyond that way. And so I'm going to avoid meditation because I'm actually trapping myself into this, right? And I think somehow there is that busyness, even important work and service, is seductive in terms of pulling us from that grounded space, or from that, that 20 minutes or twice a day, or whatever we define as our core or foundation stone of practice. And yet, and that we can keep like almost vacillating between unhealthy ways of thinking about that. On the one hand, it's like, I don't need this anymore because Eckhart told me I'm just shoving God under a bench and I'm just focusing on this. And I'd rather read about, meditation than actually practice it because it's a little more intellectually stimulating and conceptual and exciting. And then comes the dry, desolate, boring sit. So there's that seduction. And on the other hand, then there is sort of the pridefulness that comes with, hey, I'm on a really good streak right now. I've been at this every day for 6 months. Look at me go. And then that becomes its own trap, right? Because then, so it's this constant need for interior vigilance to hold that balance. And a lot of it, frankly, you've got to take it with a degree of humor. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself. You've got to be able to see how easily your mind plays with you around what it really wants versus what you think or say you want. Von Balthasar, somewhere in my book, I quote him saying, we all pretend to love silence, but the minute we're confronted with it, we start up a noise in ourselves, something like this. But I mean, there's something very clearly that resonates around, how do we balance? Because we do, I think, crave the silence. And then it's a little bit, if not, people say, oh, I'm terrified by the void. I'm not terrified by the silence. I'm bored by the silence. It's just dry and boring. And my intellectual mind just wants to go on a marathon. And just because it's more interesting. So it's that, how do we hold those things? And to both of your points, John and Penny, I do think that both monastics and those of us in the world go through fluctuations where we're trying to modulate that. And we're not going to look for that steady persistence, but we learn from the dips and the rises about how to keep coming to a more balanced place. At least that's been my experience from my youth. I was much more, longer periods of absence and then intensity. And that's modulated to a much more attentiveness to the practice, and then realizing, oh, it's been several days now, and I've just allowed myself to get preoccupied with God knows what. It's time to really think through how I'm avoiding this, right? But have fun with it, because it's all of it is, in Siddhartha, in his in Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, he has that beautiful notion of spiritual life being like a shining star, which is this unmovable, constant, persistent glow, versus the falling leaf, which is like all over the map as it's just, swirling and turning and twisting. And he says, most of us are more like a falling leaf than a shining star. But he says, despite in his own experience, it's a lovely book where he goes to every extreme from, complete indulgence to complete fasting to intellectual pursuits to, loneliness and poverty. But he says, like, what he realizes is that the whole journey that felt to him like these extreme vacillations were actually still heading in the same direction, which is downward into the depths, as the leaf does. So even though the leaf is unpredictable and chaotic in its fall, it's still going in one consistent direction. And so there's a beautiful message as we get tossed around by the winds of life, and we're twisting and turning, that's all part of a trajectory we're on, and we just have to be attentive to the process, right? That we're not really lost. We're still falling into the ground of being, and we just have to stay attentive. Lucy, please. Yeah, sure. Lucy, go right ahead.
Good morning, Father Vincent. Good morning, everybody. Well, I really love this reading, because last year there was a member of our board who asked me, he said, because he's a very religious man, and he asked me, Lucy, are you Martha or Mary? And that really made me think, because I felt like it was a direct confrontation, because it seemed like I was to make an analogy, like the rabbit, and the rabbit and the turtle.
The tortoise, yeah.
Yeah. Well, who wins the race? It's the turtle. So I thought like the turtle was Mary, and the rabbit was Martha. So I was like Martha, because running around doing a whole bunch of things, and so then I thought, okay, I really have to internalize and do this contemplative centering prayer practice so that I can be more like Mary. Because to me, that's what I felt that he was telling me, that I was not centered enough. And maybe I was too stressed out and tired from too much work. But now with this reading, what I'm realizing, if I understood well, is that with the practice of meditation and the capacity of staying centered during the day, during my work, the capacity of being connected to my inner self and the spirit, then I'm integrated. I have integrated both. In other words, I am Mary and Martha in one. I mean, ideally, this is a work in progress.
Sure.
But am I right in thinking that way? That, is Martha more evolved than Mary because she has both of the best worlds?
Well, what Eckhart is suggesting is that she is the mature version of Mary, because she's able to put aside her need for the consolation that comes through her meditative practice. And she's enabled herself in her maturity to detach from that, the beauty and the bliss and the consolation of sitting at the feet of Jesus, which of course is a metaphor for meditation.
Her ego.
What's that?
Her ego.
Yeah, her ego, but also her desire. This is where he's really clear. And it's a little bit shocking when you first hear what he's trying to say, but he says that the highest, most supreme Christian virtue is not love, it's detachment. And the reason for that, and so he's saying Mary in her immaturity is still attached to her way of prayer, right? To her method, to the bliss of meditation, whereas Martha has matured beyond that attachment. And he says detachment is so important because, like an analogy, even if you had a sheet of paper with the most beautiful poem on it, that paper can no longer receive anything else because it's full. It's as pretty as that poem may be, because it's not a blank slate anymore. You're done. There's nothing more you can do. Nothing new that can happen on that page. Essentially, is his point. So, if we're going to love purely in every moment, we have to be unattached. Attachment reduces our capacity to love freely because we're attached to this outcome or to that condition or to this expectation. When we drop all of that in full detachment, we can just love as love demands in the moment. And he says that's what Martha has essentially achieved. So unlike Mary, who's still attached to her meditation, when the dear guest Christ comes to your home, Martha has the contemplative capacity to say, oh, I'm going to detach from my commitment to prayer in order to do what love demands in this moment, which is to serve. And so when that neighbor or that coworker or that family member or that whoever comes to my door, do I have the maturity to hold? And this is what I think, John was talking about, the capacity to hold that balance, to hold that space as I'm serving, rather than need to cling to that in the moment when there's another demand that has greater importance, that is one of service and discipleship in service of the dear guest Christ who comes to me in another person. So in a way, he says that Martha and Jesus are chiding with one another because they both know that Mary will get there. She'll mature. She's not there yet, poor dear. But in her innocence, she has these attachments and wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We know where this is going and she'll get there eventually. Bless her heart. You see what I mean? So it's sort of that kind of chiding that's going on between them is what he's saying. So thank you, Lucy. Carl, please go right ahead. Carl, you are muted.
Yes.
There. Oh, there you go.
Okay, thank you. In listening to the reading and to the conversations, I couldn't help but think how much all of this is simply, well, not simply, is a love story.
Mm.
And it made me reflect on the fact that my wife and I have just celebrated our 55th anniversary
Congratulations.
of being one with one another.
Mm.
And that love has grown and deepened over those 55 years.
Mm.
And it involves a lot of action, but moments of tenderness and moments of experiencing the depths of an embrace, of a kiss. And for me, meditation is affording me an opportunity to experience that loving embrace again, the embrace of the God, of my God.
Mm.
So I in my life can no longer separate the prayer from my life. My life is my prayer. And that involves the busyness, but it also involves the tender, loving embraces that allow that prayer to deepen, allows my life to deepen. And yes, it was beautiful to see the take on the Martha Mary story in a different light than what we have experienced it in. And to realize once again that for me, that story is a story of love, maturing. So when I think of these things, prayer is for me setting aside or moments of prayer is setting aside an opportunity to be embraced and to be loved in a very special way, just as it is in my physical life with my wife, to have opportunities to say to one another, I love you, allows our love to continue to grow and to deepen, and the unity between us to become stronger. And I got thinking about the fact that, yeah, my ways are not her ways, my words are not her words, but our love is one. Thank you.
Well,
Mm.
I don't know if we lost Father Vincent or.
It's like,
I'll wait a few moments to see if he returns. Well, Rosemary, would you like to make a comment?
Know what happened. Does anyone know what happened?
No, we think perhaps Father Vincent's connection was interrupted.
Oh,
Rosemary, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
pardon me?
Did you want to make a comment because your hand was raised?
Yes, I had a comment, but what I was going to, you want me to continue?
Yes, please.
All right.
Please.
What came to mind was, for me, we that it seems to we need the qualities of both Mary and Martha in our lives, because as we grow and deepen our prayer life, we grow in our spirituality. All our relationship with the Lord leads to service, and if it doesn't lead to service, then it's really we have to look at our relationship and our prayer life, because all deep prayer life and our spiritual growth leads to service.
Thank you, Rosemary. Peg, would you like to? say something?
Yes, I just want to make a comment. That was my husband that shared that beautiful sharing on love as a result of our 55 years of marriage. And we're not in the same room, so I don't even get to see him right now because we're both on. But to thank him, that was very heartfelt and very true. That comes from the both of us, of what we have discovered in looking at love. Thank you.
Thank you, Peg. Steve.
Well, I was just going to reiterate the same thing about love. Always wants to find a way. I think uh, in our living, our I've been meditating on the word to see thee more clearly, love thee more nearly, and follow thee more dearly. Old song used to be sung in Godspell, but I think it comes from the 12th century. And however we achieve that, that's where we want to go.
Thank you. Thank you. If you're not muted, please mute yourself because we're getting some background noise. Thank you for your comment, Steve.
Yeah, I'm trying to get this thing. I've got an adapter. My,
Okay. Anyone else? I wish I could share the last part of the reading because it talked about being available moment by moment as that coming together of the contemplative and the active. Does anyone have the book and could read that passage for us again?
I have it, Christine, if you want me to
Thank
read
you.
it.
Yes, please do.
To live nimbly, moment to moment, as the Spirit calls and love demands, is to live in perfect union with God. Here again is contemplative discipleship. And
Yeah,
that's the last sentence of the last full paragraph on page 157.
yeah. Anyone else have the book who could read it to us again?
I can read it again.
Thank you, Penny.
To live nimbly, moment to moment, as the Spirit calls and love demands, is to live in perfect union with God. Here again is contemplative discipleship.
I'm reminded of a candle light flickering, and between the wick and the flame is a blue space, a space. And for me, this being nimble in being present to God and present to what is before us is like the candle flickering. It is one light, but it has these two aspects. One that is dynamic and the other that is quiet and spacious. Joanne, did you want to say more about the desolation of prayer and what it teaches us?
No, that's the contemplative practice that he was going to give us for today, for the week. So I just wanted to post it there so you all had it.
That's great. Would you like to read it for us again?
Yeah, embrace the desolation of prayer. What does it teach you?
And what about the practice for this last week?
I can look that up. I don't know it right off the top of my head. Give me a second. I'll look it up. Okay.
Okay. And if anyone has done the practice and would like to share their experience, we would love to hear from you. You can just unmute yourself and tell us. Practice what it means not to be distracted by many things. That's one I really struggled with this last week because I'm in the middle of moving and having to unpack boxes and do this and do that. And I just find myself overwhelmed and stressed by so much. And I really need my quiet time.
King David, go get my sock. Go get mommy's sock. Go get my sock. Go get my sock. Bring it here.
Someone's playing with their dog or a child. So
You
any
do
other,
very well, Christine, as a fill-in for Father. Thank you for doing that.
well, of course, I'm sure he's anxious about what's going on, but any other thoughts or reflections?
Well, a little thought I have, it's just kind of coming to me now. Often we think of, we wear two hats. We wear one for our quiet time, our prayer time, and then another for our service. I'd like to think that for myself, I wear one hat. I have my prayer time, but yet I will encounter someone on the bus. And it's a flow, I find, rather than. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I love Eckhart's playfulness around this. You know, that the idea that Jesus and Martha connected on the level of supporting Mary and where she was, and yet realizing there was this other way of contemplative action or contemplation in action. Let's just take a moment to sit with the teaching for today and the thoughts of the past week. And then if any, Penny, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the idea of detachment that Father Vincent was introducing, that as far as Eckhart was concerned, detachment was more important than love. And I wanted to stew a little bit with that, because I think that in a way, detachment is an expression of love, because it means putting oneself not at the center, but looking at the world, looking at the other as if they're the center. And so it's a detachment from what I'm getting out of it, which tends to be our motivation for most of what we do in our lives. And it's a curious notion, but until you're kind of detached from your own perspective, it's really impossible to love, because you're always looking at it from your own lens, your own eyes, your own needs. And perhaps that's really what meditation opens us up to, is the ability to be aware of the chatter that's going on in our lives. For instance, right now, the rain is coming down heavy, and I'm worrying about, can I drive to Inverness tomorrow? Because will the roads be flooded, and will the wind be blowing? And I hate getting on the freeway when it's, stormy weather. Will it be possible? So all of that is going through my mind, which is all really driven by my anxiety to keep safe. And but if I can detach myself from that, It'll be what it'll be tomorrow morning. I will either go or I will not go. But it's detachment seems to me, we don't often associate that word with love. And yet he's saying that's really most important. So maybe somebody else has further reflections on that.
Well, I hear what you're saying. And for me, love has a connotation of passion, and passion is opens us up to suffering. So if we have such an intense love, if there is a suffering component to that, which keeps us in a state of unquietness. And so that detachment takes that passion, that passion out of the love and takes us to that place of what is sometimes called the just awareness itself, the awakened self, or the waking witness of what is right in front of us right now, which helps us be truly present to God, who is only in the now. Carl, what would you like to talk about?
Once again, something that I've used several times, and that's in teaching or helping young couples marriage preparation, and bringing to them the realization or the thought that love is the willingness to sacrifice all that one is so that the other can become. And I think that's what I have based my life on. And so detachment, sacrifice all that one is for the other to become. I think of the love that God has shown to each of us has been a sacrifice so that we can become. And how can I not sit in awe and humility, realizing the depths to which I have been loved throughout my life, and not try to emulate it the way that I am living this day, this moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. That's so profoundly beautiful. And it really speaks to, as you say, God creating by becoming creation, and the kenosis of Christ, who gave up divinity to walk this world with us for our sake, that we might share in that divinity. Patty.
Yeah, this is such a coincidence. Yesterday I was reading in Master Eckhart's book, From Whom God Hid Nothing. And he has this huge chapter on detachment. And I'll just read two of the points he makes, which everybody is speaking so beautifully to. I praise detachment more than love, because love forces me to suffer all things for the sake of God. But detachment makes me receptive of nothing but God. And then he goes on to say, I praise detachment above all humility. And for this reason, humility can exist without detachment, but perfect detachment cannot subsist without perfect humility.
Wow, we could sit with that for a long time.
It's a great little book. It really stirs a lot.
Well, that reminds me of a gem I found yesterday that I'm still just living with, and it's from Hafiz. It's a very short poem I'd like to read to you. I know of beauty that no one has ever known. But how could that be possible when I may seem so new in infinite time? It is because God belongs to only you. Did you hear that? Did you hear what Hafiz just said? God belongs to only you. That is the only reasonable payment for a single tear.
What book are you reading from, Christine?
It's called
What's it called? A Year with Hafiz. Thank
A
you.
Year with Hafiz, Daily Contemplations by Daniel Ladinsky. But
Mhm.
that poem always brings tears to my eyes. It's so profound. Yeah. And I think knowing that God belongs completely to me then allows me to detach. Somehow I'm so full of God that I can let go. I can rest, be present to what is. Well, let's just take Patty, do you still have your hand up? Did you want to say something else?
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
let's take a few moments to simply be with all that's been shared. And then if someone else wants to share more, they can, or we can move forward to a closing prayer. Steve, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Well, well, I was thinking of Father Keating, or somewhere in my work with the chapter here in Des Moines, that, or maybe it's, I don't know, there's Thomas, no. Anyway, the Buddhist experience of detachment being so important, but the Christian experience of being attached to Christ is so important. And I don't know how those two come together, but I've heard this word detachment, I've heard the word love, and I think that maybe that calls for some discernment. I wish Father Vincent could finish off with that, but I don't know if we can. Anyway, that's what's coming to my memory in my study of the spiritual journey with Father Keating.
Yeah. Any other comments before Joanne leads us in a closing prayer? So did we lose Joanne as well?
Yes, she left, Christine. She left a message in the chat that said, thank you to everyone. And
Oh,
I'll
she
be,
did.
and I'll be sending the prayers and
Okay.
the practice.
Okay, all right. Well, would someone like to lead us in a closing prayer today? Well, let us pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this sacred, holy time together this morning. We thank you for how you give yourself to us so completely, we can hardly take you in. Help us, Lord, to appreciate our meditation and strive towards being both the candle flame and the space between the wick and the flame. Knowing that our detachment is always undergirded by complete love that only you can give. Father, we pray for Father Vincent and everyone who's faced with storms and a loss of power these days. May they know your presence. Bless us all this week as we continue on the way with you, and God bless everyone. Amen. Well, dears, have a wonderful week. I hope to see you next Saturday.